This is Caleb. Caleb is a popular Magic the Gathering streamer, and a week or so ago, Caleb had an idea. He said, "Brilliant! Hey, this new card, Agatha's Soul Cauldron, seems pretty good. It's a 2-mana artifact that gives your creatures the abilities of creatures that are in your graveyard." So Caleb made a deck with this fancy new card, and also included other cards that synergize well with it, like Priest of Forgotten Gods, Grist the Hunger Tide, and the Yawgfather, Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. And then Caleb took this creation and he played some games with it, and he went undefeated.
Nice little
So
5-0.
today, I'm going to do my best Caleb D impression with his list to see if I can crush the dreams of my opposition too. Can I do it? Let's find out. All right, we are playing the hottest thing since sliced white bread. Let's get to it. Opening 7, this looks acceptable, we'll keep it. Opponent leads with a Blood Crypt Shock into a Ragavan. Drew into a Beseiju. I think we're going to lead Verdant, fetch out a basic Swamp, play out our Supplier. It's going to trigger, pass the turn. Bloodstained Mire, fetch from our opponent, terminate the Supplier, 3 more cards to our graveyard. Ragavan will connect, down to 17. Young Wolf in exile. Drew a basic Forest. We'll play that out and play out our Priest. We'll pass the turn back. Opponent with a Fury. Hits our Priest. Fury to the graveyard. We'll take 2 once more. Grist revealed. That's pretty brutal. Would have liked that one. Okay, and our opponent opts for a Grief instead. Very strange. They take our Blood Artist. Wow. All right. We'll play out another Stitcher Supplier. It's going to trigger. 3 more cards to the graveyard. We'll play out a Dryad Arbor, and we'll pass the turn. Opponent up to 2 cards in hand, and another Fury. This is a tough one. All right, 3 more cards to the graveyard. We're going to take 6, go down to 9. Ragavan's going to trigger again. Exiles a land. Exiles a Priest off the top. It's weird our opponent's not casting any of the cards they're hitting with their Ragavan. Now we turn to a Young Wolf, which is fine. Play out our Overgrown Tomb tapped. Pass the turn back. Attack for 4, we'll go down to 6. Opponent with a Kroxa. We'll discard the Overgrown Tomb. Down to 4 life. And now we're in a little bit of a predicament. That was a good draw. We'll minus our Grist. We'll kill the Grief. Turn the Young Wolf. And I think we're going to play out this land just in case they can cast their Kroxa. And while Grist is great, a streak of excellent draws including such hits as Terminate, Orcish Bowmasters, Daughty Voidwalker, and the return of Kroxa from the Great Beyond turned out to be way more than my poor Grist could handle. We're down 1 game. I don't think we can ask for more out of a 7, we'll keep it. Our opponent keeps their 7. Start with a Blooming Marsh into a Young Wolf. Polluted Delta from our opponent. Fetch Shock. There's a Grief. We're getting scammed. Take our Bowmaster. Grief's coming back. Take our Yawgmoth. Untap. Drew into a fetch land. Not bad. So we'll start with a fetch. We're going to lead on the basic Swamp again here. Fatal push down this Grief. We'll take 1 off the Wicked Roll token. And I think I'm going to leave this Wolf back just in case there's a Ragavan down the pipeline. Opponent untaps. Nothing else. We drew into a Walking Ballista. Not terrible. We'll start with an attack for 1. Let's play out this Priest. Play out a Yavimaya. And we'll pass the turn back. Opponent with a Fury. Discarding a Blood Moon. Both our creatures die. Undying triggers. Wolf's going to come back. And it looks like our opponent has another Undying effect. Not dead after all. Fury's coming back. It's going to wipe our Young Wolf off the board. Drew another Young Wolf. Not bad. We'll play that out. We're going to play a Ballista for 1. Pass the turn. Opponent attacks. Block with our Young Wolf. Wolf comes back. Back our way. We'd love a Cauldron right now. Not a Cauldron. Nor was any draw for the remainder of the game. We scratched and clawed and hung on for dear life over the next several turns, but getting scammed multiple times in the first few turns can be too much for even the scrappiest of combatants to come back from. An unfortunate start to our league, but we've got heart. And while we might be down, we sure as heck ain't out. We're about to go streaking, and let me show you how we do it. Okay, that was not a good first round, but we're going to try to bounce back here. Let's mulligan this opening 7. 6-card hand looks much better. We actually have cards that do things. I think we're going to bottom 1 of the Young Wolves. Opponent's on the play. Prismatic Vista, fetch, Preordain. Here that one's good. Opponent puts both on the bottom with the Preordain. Let's move to our turn. We drew into a Grist, which is excellent. Play out our Young Wolf. Let's pass it back the other way. Another Preordain from the other side of the table. This feels like blue-black control. Scalding Tarn into play. And the Preordained topped 1, bottomed 1. Drew into our second Yawgmoth. We're going to start with our basic Swamp. We're going to crack in for 1. Opponent's down to 18. We're not going to play around a Spell Pierce here. We're just going to cast this Cauldron out. Hopefully it resolves. Opponent fetches. Deinvents. Shock. Feels like a Spell Pierce. And it is. This could be Murktide, for which you normally don't expect to see Prismatic Vista. A little unusual. 2 mana from my opponent, Expressive Iteration. I hear that card's good. Flooded Strand, it's into play. Back our way. Drew another Yawgmoth. We'll swing in with ours for 1. Boom, the wolf connects. We'll play out the peat land. Let's get our grist into play. Opponent with 6 cards in hand. Could be a subtlety. No subtlety. We'll plus the grist. Halfling to the graveyard. Pass the turn back. Fetch end of turn from my opponent. Steam Vents is into play. Untapped. Feels like a lightning bolt. And it is. Grist down to 1 loyalty. It's back to my opponent's turn. 2 mana. Snapcaster Mage. A lightning bolt will likely be coming back here. And there it is. Grist gets bolted down. Hallowed Fountain. Unexpected. Tapped. Can we pull a land? We cannot. But that's okay. I think we're going to play out our Yawgmoth here. And we'll follow that up with nothing. And just pass the turn. I thought about casting out the Court of Calling during my turn while I had the opportunity, but figured it would be better off drawing out a counterspell so I could make room for my Yawgmoth. Untap. Drew into our land that we were looking for here. Let's attack in with our insect. No block from my opponent. Shock in an Overgrown Tomb. See if our opponent has a counterspell yet. And they do not. Alright, we'll just pass it back. They do not have Delirium as of right now, so we're not going to put this Snapcaster into the graveyard just yet. Expressive Iteration. Basic Island in Exile. Play it out. My opponent's thinking during the dress step, suggesting possibly a dress down. Nope, a Flame of Anor. We will respond to this. Sacrifice our Yawgmoth, target the Snapcaster Mage. Draw a card. Let's do it again. And again. 4 lands so far. There's a Bowmaster. And we've got a full grip. We'll stop there. Let's untap. From this point, there is very little my opponent could do to come back from such a disadvantaged position. They make a last-ditch effort bouncing my Yawg with Teferi, but instead die to a wide board full of attackers. Like our 7, we'll keep it. Flood Strand Fetch. Opponent with a Preordain, off their Hallowed Fountain. 2 on the top. Drew into a Scavenging Ooze. Not bad. Play out our Ignoble. It's probably not going to live, but we'll pass the turn. Prismatic Ending. Shock into Steam Vents. Preordain. 2 on the bottom this time. Phew! Turn to a Bowmaster, so that's a good one. Play out our Verdant Catacombs. We'll fetch. We're going to get a basic Swamp. We're going to jam this Bowmaster here, and now put our opponent down to 14. Okay, Bowmaster gets endinged. Opponent misses a land drop, is tapped out. We're feeling good about that. Let's attack for 1. Play out our Grist. Grist resolves without hesitation. We'll plus up the Grist. 2 insects enter the battlefield, and our opponent scoops it up. We're 1-1. Let's go. Jumping into the 3rd match of this league, we won the die roll. Opening 7 looks good. To be expected, we're going to lead off on our Blooming Marsh into a Yawgmoth. Pass it the other way. Opponent starts off with a Misty Rainforest, fetches. What could it be? It's a Breeding Pool. They shock it in. Suggestive of Living End. I think we're going to start off with an attack with our Yawgmoth. Our opponent goes down to 16 life. We're way ahead. Play out our Priest. It resolves. And our opponent cycles Alorian Revealed, so this might be Rhinos. They find their Steam Vents, and they untap. Rhinos tends to be Yawgmoth's worst matchup, as this game so aptly demonstrates when a crash of Rhinos enters the battlefield on turn 3, followed up by double Fire Ice on turn 4, and more Rhinos on turn 5. We were never able to get our footing, but I'm curious to see how a card like Priest of Forgotten God lines up in this matchup when on the play post-sideboard. Game 2, we'll take the play. Unfortunately, we can't keep this 7. We'll mulligan down to 6 cards. 6 cards a little bit better. We'll keep this. And I think we get rid of Yawgmoth here. Opponent with the Gemstone Caverns to start things out. A little unfortunate. And they exile if it falls. Only 3 more to go. We're going to start on our Halfling. Pass the turn. Opponent with a Misty Rainforest. They fetch. Basic Island. Untap. Imagine one of our lands is getting tapped down. Confirmed. Blooming Marsh tapped. Drew into a Dryad Arbor. We'll pay 2 life. And I would like to resolve this Soulless Jailer, please. And it sticks. Back my opponent's way. Soulless Jailer is a relatively new inclusion to Yawgmoth lists, but is in most sideboards as a tutorable option to shut down opposing Cascade decks and their ability to cast their Suspend cards from exile. Until the Jailer is removed from the board, my adversary is SOL. And we untap. Verdant Catacombs, actually a good draw. We're going to start by plussing our Grist. Play on a land, we'll fetch. Get a basic Forest here. 2 mana, we're going to lead on our Cauldron. It resolves. We're going to eat our Dryad Arbor. My opponent's responding with 3 mana, Flame of Anor, destroying my Soulless Jailer. Dryad Arbor exiled, put a counter on the insect token. Looks like our opponent will have the opportunity to resolve a Cascade spell. Okay, back our way. We have a good turn coming up. We're going to add black mana, and we're going to cast our Tyvar. And they respond with the Flame of Anor to draw 2 cards. Very unusual. Alright, Tyvar resolves. We'll minus Tyvar. And we'll return Soulless Jailer to play. We're going to plus our Grist. We're going to use our Cauldron to exile a Priest. We're going to put a counter on our Soulless Jailer. I think we can afford to attack for 2 here, so we're going to do that. Opponent casts Dead on my Delighted Halfling, end of turn. Happy to have that in my graveyard. Play out a land, back our way. Drew into a peat land. We're going to start by plussing our Grist, another Priest into the graveyard. Let's play out our peat land. We're going to add a green mana, and we're going to draw a card. We drew a Yawgmoth. We're going to use our Cauldron. We'll exile a Halfling, put a counter on an insect. We're going to untap the Jailer, and play out a Yawgmoth, and we're going to attack for 4. Opponent's up to 3 cards in hand, and nothing else. On to game 3. Opponent keeps a 7-card hand. I don't think we can ask for more out of our hand, so we'll keep this as well. One of the basic mountain, going our way. Blooming Marsh, Delighted Halfling. There we go. Halfling's gonna die. Nope. Lorien revealed. Success. Opponent untaps. Breeding Pool into play. Suspend of Footfalls. Okay, we'll untap. We drew into a Priest, which is actually very good. Play out our Twilight Mire into a Wall of Roots into a Priest. It resolves, and we're going back the other way. Footfalls on Suspend goes down to 3. Shock into Steam Vents. Feels like a Shardless Agent, and it is. Crashing Footfalls into play, and back our way. All right, Yawgmoth is excellent. Yawgmoth was our best possible draw, and now we're primed for an explosive turn. Cast the Yawg, cast the Wolf, and activate Priest to add 2, drain 2, and make them sacrifice their Shardless. With 2 mana floating from the Priest, we can cast out the Cauldron, eat the Halfling, and pump our Yawg, making it a formidable blocker for the Rhinos. When it attacks for 8, we're going to move to blocks. We'll block one of them with the Yawgmoth. For damage, my opponent casts a Violent Outburst. There's going to be more Rhinos coming down the pipeline. Rhinos into play, Outburst off of Suspend. We're going to put a counter on our Yawgmoth. We'll sacrifice the Priest, and then we'll put a counter on one of the Rhinos. Yawgmoth back into play, draw another card, kill the Rhino. We'll take 5. Opponent plays out a land, back to us. Untap. We drew a land, which is not what we're looking for here. Add a mana. We're going to sacrifice our Wall of Roots. We're down 10 life. All right, that does give us another creature. We're going to put a counter on one of these Rhinos, down to a 3/3. We drew into an Urborg. Play out our Wooded Foothills. We're going to fetch. Get our Dryad Arbor. -1 counter on the Yawgmoth. Drew into a Halfling. Counter on the other Rhino. Drew into a Fatal Push. Okay, that's pretty good. We're going to play out this Halfling. We're going to eat the Priest. Counter on the Halfling. 2 mana. We're going to discard Overgrown Tomb, and we're going to proliferate. Then we're going to pass the turn back. Footfalls down to 1. Opponent has 4 cards in hand. Basic Island. My opponent's going to ice down my Yawgmoth. I'm going to respond with a Fatal Push on this Rhino token. All right, Rhino's down. Yawgmoth's tapped. Then my opponent scoops. We got there. We're on to our 4th match with a 2-1 record as it stands. We are going to be on the draw. We'll keep our 7. Dark Slick Shores and a Rune Crab from our opponent to start with. We'll lead on our Blooming Marsh into a Delighted Halfling, and we'll pass the turn. Fairly obviously, the trump card when playing this matchup is Endurance, as its ability to shuffle its controller's graveyard back into the library negates all of the hard work the mill player puts forth. This list's exclusion of Endurance from the main deck means that the triple crab threat on the other side of the table leaves us with no outs. Let's retool our deck for game 2 with multiple Endurance and try again. Take the play. Don't love that we have fetch lands, but we do have an Endurance, so we're going to keep it. Opponent mulligans to 6. Start with our Foothills and a fetch. Overgrown Tomb, Shock, Delighted Halfling. Pass the turn. Opponent with an Archive Trap. Bunch of cards into our graveyard. Polluted Delta fetch. Fatal Push away our Halfling. Sure. Drew into a Priest. I only had 1 fetchable land left in the deck. Basic Forest. Play that out. We'll lead on our Priest this turn. Pass the turn. Basic Swamp from my opponent. Back our way. Drew into another Priest. Start with an attack for 1. Opponent's down 16. Play out another Priest. Fractured Sanity from my opponent. 4 into the graveyard. And they draw a card. Play out our Dryad Arbor. Pass the turn. 1 mana Rune Crab. Dark Slick Shores. Back our way. Drew another land. I think we're going to start with this Cauldron. Opponent with a Drown in the lock. We're going to Endurance in response. We'll target our graveyard. With the trigger on the stack, we're going to sacrifice Dryad Arbor. Sacrifice the other Priest. And the Endurance. Okay, opponent sacrifices their crab. We have 2 mana. We drew into a Blood Artist. Endurance shuffles our graveyard. Cauldron into play. Play out our Blood Artist. Play out our land. And we're going to fetch now. Get our other Overgrown Tomb. Tapped. Pass the turn back. Fatal Push from my opponent, killing our Blood Artist. It's going to trigger another Rune Crab. Another land. Triggers. Grist into the graveyard. We like that. I'm going to eat my Grist end of turn. We're going to put a counter on this Dryad Arbor. Exiling Grist with Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a powerful combination that has the ability to turn all of your onboard creatures into mini Grists. My opponent recognizes that they stand no chance in the wake of a swarm of insects and are prepared to move on to game 3. My opponent's going to mulligan to 6. I think we're going to join them. My opponent's on a mulligan to 5. I think we're going to join them once again. And I think we'll keep this 5. We're going to get rid of our Fatal Push and our Blood Artist. Opponent with Shelldock Isle tapped. Back to us. Drew into a Fatal Push. We'll start with our Halfling, and we'll pass the turn. Crab people. Blue to Delta. 2 lands and a Court of Calling into the graveyard. My opponent fetches Watery Grave, shocks it into play, Yawgmoth and Grist into the graveyard, and a Soul Guide Lantern. That's unfortunate. Opponent eats my Grist. Drawn to a Bowmasters, was hoping for a black land there. Let's play out our Cauldron, and we're going to eat our Yawgmoth. Opponent does not allow it. Exiles our graveyard. Play out a land, pass the turn. Preordained from my opponent. 1 on top, 1 on bottom. Play out an island. We're drawing into a lot of Bowmasters here. We're going to exile our Hierarch, and we're going to put a counter on the Halfling. I think we're going to pass the turn. Back the opponent's way, 3 cards in hand. End step, we'll add a black mana, and we'll flash in our Bowmaster. Opponent with a Fractured Sanity, 4 cards into my graveyard. A Priest, a Yawgmoth, an Endurance. I think we're okay with all that. We'll ping them for 1. Alright, and now it is on. We'll start by exiling our Yawgmoth. Cauldron, put a counter on the Bowmaster. Use a green, cast out a Young Wolf. Pay a life, target the Rune Crab, sacrifice the Young Wolf, draw a card, drew a Wooded Foothills. With most of our creatures possessing +1/+1 counters, and Yawg being exiled under the Cauldron, we have an army of Yawg children who are waiting to make use of their father's lesser known ability, Proliferate. These children grow up quick and enter the red zone, and my opponent's life total and chances of winning fade away. Final match, I think we keep this hand. We're going to be on the draw. Bloodstain Mire and nothing else. Drew into a Bowmaster. We're going to shock in our tomb. Play out our Young Wolf. Pass the turn. Fetch from our opponent. Proving Ground tapped. Likely creativity. Not creativity. Basic Forest. Back to us. Drew our 3rd Grist. Not really what we're looking for here. Play out an Urborg. Move to combat. It's going to be a Bowmaster. Pings my Young Wolf. Comes back into play. And we'll return the favor. Ping their Bowmaster. Opponent with a Ghost Quarter. Don't see that every day. Nihil Spellbomb. This is a Jund Saga-ish brew, I'm imagining. Into a Fury. Discarding an Unholy Heat. Looks like my board is going away. Actually just a 2 for 2 though. Orc Army swings in. We're down to 17. If we can draw land, all is good. And we have 4 Grists in our hand. Okay. We're going to play out our Priest and we'll pass the turn. Priest is going to die. Lightning Bolt. 2 mana from my opponent into a Tarmogoyf. It's going to be a 3/4. Not too scary. Attack for 1, we're down to 16. Can we find a land? And we do. Alright, we're in business. Play our first of 4 Grists in our hand, plus our Grist. Stitcher Supplier into the graveyard, Insect into play. 3 mana from my opponent. There's a Kolaghan's Command. They return Fury from their graveyard to their hand. They kill my Grist. I remain at 16 life. Drew into a Hierarch. I'm going to play out another Grist. Why? Because I can. Plus our Grist. Cauldron into the graveyard. Insect into play. Opponent casts out a Wrenn 6. I'm going to ping away my Insect. Tarmogoyf is going to attack into my Grist. Down to 15 life. Drew into a Court of Calling. Starting to run out of options here. We'll play out an Ignoble Hierarch. We're going to play out our Blood Artist. Opponent returns a land, puts it into play, fetches, Basic Mountain, add a black mana Fatal Push. It's going to trigger our Blood Artist. Attack for 6 will go down 10 life. 3 mana, a Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. We do know our opponent's last card is a Fury. We draw into a Wall of Roots, which isn't bad. Start by casting that out. Pass turn back, Fable ticks up. Keep both the cards in their hand. Opponent with a Fatal Push, which means they can't cast the Fury this turn, so we're going to respond to this. 4 mana, we're going to cast our Court of Calling. We're going to get ourselves a Young Wolf. Wall of Root's going to die, it's going to trigger Blood Artist. Wrenn 6 is going to ping our Blood Artist. Opponent attacks with the team. We'll block the Tarmogoyf here. Young Wolf's going to come back if the Spellbomb allows it. And it does, okay. Might have been a misclick from my opponent. Back our way. Drew another Young Wolf. We're going to start by attacking into the Wrenn 6. Cast our 3rd Grist of the game. Minus our Grist, sacrifice our Young Wolf, kill this Tarmogoyf. End of turn, my opponent's going to Spellbomb, exile my graveyard and draw a card. Flexion into play. Opponent plays out a land. 5 mana, here comes the Fury. Hits down the Grist. Opponent attacks for 3. We don't have any blocks, we're down to 6 life. Drew into our 4th land. Unfortunately, Blooming Marsh comes into tapped, so we will not be able to use that. We're going to scoop it up. While we did our best to impersonate Caleb's league run, we came up short both in our first and last match of the league versus 2 very similar decks. Our Game 2 fate was much like that of the first game of this series, with the enemy building equity with Wrenn 6 and slowly chipping away at our resources. There was no Cauldron to be seen, and our demise was slow and demoralizing as a result. This list was a lot of fun to play, but a more stock build is likely the better option to maximize competitiveness. Thank you for tuning in. I will see you all again very soon. You know the deal, everyone. Be well.